Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I'm your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. This is the last 2020 episode of the podcast. This is the last 2020 seasonal episode as well. So I know some people go into week 17 championships. I'm assuming the majority of people are done with fantasy. All of my leagues championships were last week. If you play in week 17 championships, I would strongly recommend you reconsider that position. Week 17 just historically has been really bad for fantasy. Most of the time, there are starters sitting. I'm not sure that it's that big of an issue this year. I know that the Chiefs will probably rest their starters. So if one team's doing it, that's enough to warrant not playing fantasy football this week. So hopefully all of your leagues are done. Hopefully you're not playing this week. Hopefully all of your championships were last weekend. And this will just be kind of a wrap up of the 2020 season. I'm going to go through the congratulate or commiserate segment for the last time this year. And then I'll just go through some off season plans I have for the podcast and myself. So if you are new, maybe this is your first time listening to the podcast, you came in on the last episode of the 2020 season, welcome. Congratulate or commiserate is a segment where I go through how I did in my three leagues. I have three leagues that I play in, and then we go to a listener to see how they did. Um, I just think this adds a more personal touch to the podcast. I know a lot of the fantasy football podcasts that I have listened to in the past, they don't really talk about how they're doing in their leagues in great detail, if at all. So I just think that this helps let you know how I'm doing with my own advice that I am giving you, and just kind of adds a more personal touch to the podcast that other fantasy football podcasts may be lacking. So I will continue doing that next year for sure. Um, and with that, we will get into congratulate or commiserate for the final time. If you listened to last week's episodes, you know that I made it to the championship game in all three of my leagues. I was super happy, super proud of that. So I'm just going to break down each league. I ended up going 1-2. So I won one championship. I got runner up in two leagues. So we'll start with the Reality Sports Online League. This is the league that I was least confident in. It took a little bit of luck getting to the finals, even. So if you're unfamiliar with Reality Sports Online, it is a dynasty style league, but rather than keeping players for ever, you have them on contracts. So you sign them to like 2, 3, 4 year deals, and then they're on your team. It's like kind of like an auction where you have salary cap and you're bidding on players to certain money contracts. So, anyways, um, I felt like I was in a really good spot. You know how if you play Dynasty, you feel good about some years, and then some years it's like a rebuild year. This was not a rebuild year for me. I felt like I could compete this year. Um, and really, you start two quarterbacks. So I picked up Ryan Tannehill in free agency this past year. And then I had Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper as one of my lead wide receivers. So the Dak to Amari stack, I felt really good about that. And then Dak Prescott went down. And I kind of lost a little bit of hope of competing for a championship this year. And then I made a move to trade a future first round pick for James Robinson to kind of make up for losing Dak. And that panned out really well. James Robinson was able to carry me to the finals. Unfortunately, he was injured, and the Jaguars are tanking for Trevor Lawrence. So they didn't even try. They rolled out Mike Glennon this past week. So James Robinson was not able to help me in the finals. Um, and then after Dak went down, I've just kind of been rotating quarterbacks. I started Cam Newton a couple weeks. I've started Kirk Cousins probably the most alongside Ryan Tannehill. And this week I ended up going with Mitch Trubisky and Ryan Tannehill. Kirk Cousins would have been better. Ryan Tannehill ended up playing in like a blizzard. So didn't know that on Friday at the time when I decided to sit Kirk Cousins and start Tannehill and Trubisky, but I probably would have gone to Tannehill and Trubisky either way. They were okay for me. My running back core had been super solid all year. I have David Montgomery. And then alongside Montgomery, I had James Robinson, like I said, and Antonio Gibson. Those were kind of my three starters for a majority of the season. I did not start Antonio Gibson this past week coming off the turf toe injury. He had been out the last couple of weeks. So I had made changes to Kareem Hunt and Kenyon Drake. And I started Montgomery, Kareem Hunt, and Kenyon Drake this week. All of them were fine plays. Unfortunately, my opponent had Jeff Wilson Jr., Miles Sanders, and Myles Gaskin. So Gaskin and Jeff Wilson Jr. just kind of destroyed me. And then his two quarterbacks that he started were Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. It and then continuing down his roster, he had wide receivers of Calvin Ridley and Chris Godwin, which were fine. I had Amari Cooper and Stephon and Chase Claypool as my two secondary wide receivers, which were okay. They competed similar scores to Ridley and Godwin. And then he had Devontae Adams and I had Stephon Diggs. So that was pretty even. I was able to make up some ground with Stephon Diggs on Monday Night Football, even though his Devontae Adams play crushed it. Stephon Diggs ended up with only zero point 0.7 points less. So that was really good. And then my tight end core had been really solid all year. I had Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson. You start two tight ends. Unfortunately, Matthew Stafford went down, which we will talk about in my next league. In my next league. So Hawkinson was useless this week. And then Mark Andrews did not catch a touchdown. He finished with 10 points, which was solid, but he was outscored by Hayden Hurst, who did catch a touchdown. And then he had the Carolina defense that scored a touchdown. And I had Miami, who had been historically good, but they were just mediocre this week. So really it came down to Josh Allen crushing me, and then Jeff Wilson Jr. and Myles Gaskin just obliterating the entire world. He actually ended up with a super high score, probably a near record, if not the top record score of the entire league, like through the history of the league. It's like a 6-year league. So I put up a solid week, but there was just no competing. I ended up losing by 70 points. So tough loss, but like I said, I was just happy to make the finals after losing Dak to Amari. That really hurt the upside of my roster. And then playing without James Robinson, obviously, and a healthy Antonio Gibson also limited my upside. So I was just happy to make the finals. Second place, not bad. Hopefully next year I will have Dak coming back. And then I have Tannehill. I still have Montgomery, Gibson, Kareem Hunt, and Cam Akers as my returning running backs. And then I have Stephon Diggs, DJ Chark, and Debo as a good starting point for a wide receiver core. And both tight ends, Andrews and Hawkinson, are coming back next year. So I think I'm in a good spot to compete again next year. We will see. Second place, not that bad. Next, we will move into my 12-team Superflex League. I have been in this league for 4 years now, and in 3 of those years, I have made the finals, including this past year. The first 2 years I made it, I got second. I was able to bring the championship home finally this year. It started off rough. Saturday, I was looking down the barrel of losing in this league too, which this was the league I was most confident in. I didn't have the best regular season record, but that just was because of matchups. I had the highest points scored throughout the year, and it was really on the back of Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Josh Allen. Those were kind of my core groups. I also had Josh Jacobs, Antonio Gibson, and David Johnson thrown in there as other running back options. I kind of mix and matched based on who was hurt and who was out. The only weak point in my roster was my super flex spot. Like my second QB, I had been rolling with Stafford most of the season. Some of the weeks I ended up playing Taysom Hill when he was starting quarterback, but really that super flex spot was my weak point. But my running back group was so strong, and then AJ Brown and Justin Jefferson were so good, and then Josh Allen was one of the top 3 quarterbacks on the year, so I was able to carry myself despite that weak super flex spot. But it almost came back to bite me in the championship. I had to start Stafford, and he went out on the first offensive drive with a rolled ankle. So he ended up getting me 0.68 points. And I was thinking, oh man, hopefully the rest of my roster can make up for it. So that was the early Saturday game. And then my opponent had James Robinson as one of his starting running backs. He was ruled out late Saturday evening. And so he ended up playing Nelson Aguilar in his flex. And I was thinking, oh, this is fantastic. No James Robinson. He's stuck playing Aguilar. And then Aguilar catches some 85-yard bomb, goes for 155 and 1. And it is not looking good for me. He also had Kyler Murray, who was not that good, but it wasn't looking promising with Aguilar going off and me having basically a zero from Stafford already in my lineup. Luckily on Sunday, I was able to bounce back with David Johnson. David Johnson was a stud. I liked David Johnson in my preseason rankings a lot. I had him as a top 10 running back. And I think had he not gotten that concussion on the first play of one of those games and then been put on IR for the subsequent 3 weeks, so he basically missed 4 weeks, I think he would have been a top 10 running back. He was just so consistent. Every week he was out getting double digit fantasy points, like I said, except for the concussion week and then the IR weeks. So every week he played, he was very solid. This week, he came through in a big way with a couple touchdowns. He scored me 28 fantasy points. And then Josh Allen came through. I was down by 19 going into Monday night. My opponent was done. I just needed 19 points from Josh Allen, and Josh Allen came through with 34. So I was able to take home the title there. Yeah, super pumped about that. I ended up winning by 15. Kind of counteracting my Stafford play was he streamed the Houston defense against Cincinnati, and they got him negative 10 points. So that kind of counteracted me getting 0 from Stafford. I won by 15 anyway, so it would have been close even if he had played just an average defense. But yeah, I was glad that David Johnson and Josh Allen really came through for me. Even on down weeks from Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown, I was still able to win. Super happy to finally get it done. It would have been really depressing to make it to the finals 3 out of the 4 years that I was in that league and then get second place in all 3 of those. So I'm 1-1 so far, 1 championship, 1 second place, and we will move into my final matchup, which is the most tilt-inducing matchup I think I've ever experienced in my entire life. I lost by 0.2 points, and it's not like I scraped my way to get there. I really believe I should have won. So here we go. My roster breakdown. I have Lamar Jackson starting at QB, Josh Allen, Leonard Fournette, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Mark Andrews, David Johnson. And then my opponent had Kyler Murray, Derrick Henry, Jeff Wilson Jr., Allen Robinson, Marvin Jones, Travis Kelce, J.K. Dobbins. So after the Saturday games, it was not looking that good. He had Jeff Wilson Jr. go off against me. He did play Marvin Jones, who was essentially useless, just like my TJ Hawkinson play after Stafford got hurt. But then on my side of the ball, I had Leonard Fournette, who looked like a smash play against Detroit. But they were up 40-0 at halftime, and Fournette basically didn't see the field after the middle of the second quarter. Tom Brady got pulled at halftime. They rest most of their starters except for Mike Evans for some reason. So Fournette did not. He was good the first half. He was over 65 total yards and a touchdown, and then didn't see the ball or the field after that again because of the lopsided score. So that was a downer. And then Saturday night comes. I've got Josh Jacobs, and for some bizarre reason, if you didn't watch the game, oh my goodness, the Raiders intentionally did not score a touchdown in the final minute of the game. John Gruden, if you're listening, which you're definitely not, but you need to surround yourself with some better people, because if somebody was telling you that that was a good play, you just do not have a very good coaching staff, my friend. You need to get some better people on your staff to tell you, hey, this is really stupid. So instead of scoring a touchdown and going up 5 and then having a chance for a 2-point conversion, which would have put the Raiders up 7 with about a minute left, maybe a little less, Gruden had Josh Jacobs get to the 1 and then kneel or slide, basically surrender himself at the 1, so that Derek Carr could kneel the next play and the Raiders could kick a field goal and go up by 2 with 30 seconds left. Instead of going up by 5 or potentially 7 with a minute left, they decided to go up by 2 with only 30 seconds left. Seriously, the dumbest play ever. Everyone knew it, except for apparently John Gruden. And wouldn't you know it, Ryan Fitzpatrick throws one long pass and then the Dolphins kick a field goal to win the game because you were only up by 2 after a field goal. What? There's a time and place, I guess, for intentionally not scoring a touchdown and kicking a field goal with 0 seconds left on the clock. But if there's any time left, why would you want to go up by 2? Anyways, So that cost me 6 points right there from Josh Jacobs. He didn't score a touchdown. Leonard Fournette benched after the middle of the second quarter, didn't score me any more points. And then Lamar Jackson, the end of the game, Baltimore's up by a couple scores. They're on the 1 yard line. He hands it off to Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards fumbles, then picks up the ball again, and then fumbles a second time. And somehow that fumble is credited to Lamar Jackson. Beyond me. Beyond me. So I lost 2 points there. And then I ended up losing this matchup by 0.2 points. Terrible way to lose. I'm holding out hope for a stat correction from the NFL on Thursday that credits the fumble to Gus Edwards. If you watch the replay, it certainly looks like it should be a Gus Edwards fumble to me. But if not, since I'm only down by 0.2 points, it could be any other stat correction. Theoretically, this is a really close game. But it's just a bad way to lose that way. Josh Jacobs intentionally not scoring a touchdown. Leonard Fournette getting pulled in the middle of the second quarter. And Lamar Jackson being credited with a very questionable fumble that certainly looks to me like it should have been a Gus Edwards fumble. So yeah, I can't complain too much. I was the 6th seed. I slipped my way into the playoffs in that league. I just felt like I had a good roster built for the playoffs. And I came up against the top seed and went head to head, came really close, and to lose on a couple of very, very unfortunate situations or plays like that. Very tilting. If I had not won my other league, my 12-team Superflex league on Monday Night Football with Josh Allen, I would be tilting into oblivion right now. But at least I was able to pick up one of the championships in my 3 matchups. So that will conclude how I did. I won 1, runner-up in the other 2. Honestly, a really good year. I'm super pumped that I got to the finals in all 3 leagues. And I'm super excited for next year's fantasy football. I think just doing the podcast, doing a bunch of research, building my own models, I think it's really helped me. I definitely have not made it to the finals in all 3 leagues at the same time in the past. So my performance was up. Hopefully yours was up. Hopefully the advice I gave you was able to help. And hopefully you were able to bring home a championship like our listener who wrote in. Juan tweeted at me before last night's game. He said that he needed Josh Allen to score 19 points for a championship as well. Same situation that I needed from Josh Allen last night. I needed him to score 19 or more fantasy points to win in my 12-team Superflex League. So me and Juan, we are kindred spirits. And then we celebrated together on Twitter after Josh Allen decimated the Patriots. So congrats to Juan. Super pumped for you. Hopefully other people listening to the podcast were able to bring home a championship. And congratulations. If you did not, if you got second, still good season. Congrats on getting second place. And hopefully if you didn't make it to the championship game, you can get there next year, and I will be here to help you. So I just wanted to conclude this final 2020 episode by going through my off-season plans. I do plan on doing a weekly episode in the off-season still. I'm going to take a couple weeks off here just to get my bearings. And then we're going to go through weekly episodes. Starting in a few weeks, I will go through the top performers at each position, what I expect from the next season. And then after that, I'll keep you informed on free agency and coaching changes. And then we'll get into covering the draft and all the rookie breakdowns. And then after the draft, we'll start following teams more closely and getting into mock drafts throughout the summer. And then starting in August, I'll be back to 2 episodes a week, and we'll be going through the 2021 season. On top of all that, I will be working to refine my model. So obviously, if you work in any kind of mathematical or modeling capacity in your professional jobs like I do, you know that models can always be refined. Models are not stationary. They're never done. So I plan on working on my models so I can even get more accurate predictions and projections for next season. And then along with that, I'm going to be increasing the production value of this podcast. Hopefully, you know, if you've been listening, that this is not a job for me. This is just a hobby. I work as an actuary, hence the title of the podcast. So that is my full-time job. This is just a hobby on the side, but I will be increasing my production value, hopefully putting in some music, some segment intros into the podcast, and I'm shooting for real thumbnails on YouTube. So check that out. Hopefully next season, this is a more well-oiled machine and a more complete package and podcast production. So with that, we will conclude the 2020 season. For those of you that want to check out Week 17 rankings, if you're still playing, I will post some Week 17 rankings on the website. I'll run them through my models. I'll try to keep them updated through kickoff on Sunday, just like normal. But seriously, stop playing in Week 17. So with that, good luck. Enjoy the New Year's. And I will be back in a few weeks. Look for the podcast sometime mid-January, probably. And until then, keep crunching those numbers.